Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us for the CHCI session on virtual workforce, the new normal. My name is Maria Ibanez, and I am the Vice President of Communications at CHCI. On behalf of CHCI, I would like to thank Accenture, Dell Technologies, Hyundai Motor North America, and Salesforce for their generous support of this session. Before we begin our panel, it is my distinct privilege to welcome our panel host, Congressman Pete Aguilar, our sponsor speaker from Dell Technologies, Andrea Bogado, and our moderator, Ariel Pardes. Congressman Aguilar represents California's 31st Congressional District in San Bernardino County, located in the Inland Empire region and including the city of Bernardino and portions of Rancho Cucamonga. He is very focused on bolstering U.S. relations around the world and working with our allies to promote peace, security, and prosperity. Congressman Aguilar serves on the House Appropriations Committee and is the whip of the New Democratic Coalition and Chief Deputy Whip in the House Democratic Caucus. As a member of Congress, he prioritizes legislation that will nurture a fairer economy where everyone has the opportunity to succeed. This panel will bring together representatives from across the technology sector. To help us moderate this important and timely session, we are delighted to have a senior journalist from Wired magazine, Ariel Pardes. Ariel focuses on stories about our relationship to technology. I hope you enjoy this session, and please don't forget to continue the conversation on social media using hashtag CHCIHHM20. And now, without further ado, Congressman Aguilar.
I want to thank CHCI and Dell for organizing this timely panel. When we transitioned to work from home arrangements in March, it was hard to imagine what the future of 2020 would look like. Virtual work arrangements meant that employees were safe at home, but it also created problems for businesses and their teams alike. Parents were able to spend valuable time at home with their families, but they also had to deal with childcare as they struggled to remain productive during the workday. Members of multi-generational households had to create private space and private time for family Zooms. Managers had to learn to foster creative and collaborative environments without being physically present with their teams, often as employees feared layoffs because of economic downturn. Small businesses had to make significant investments to move the online platforms to protect jobs and to continue to serve their customers. Companies had to ensure that they could safely operate remotely, protecting their customers' and employees' data. And those without access to reliable internet had the largest hurdles to remain active in the workplace. As virtual workplace and workforce leads to the future of work discussion, it's necessary that companies address these concerns and understand the impacts that work from home means on so many people as it affects their well-being and their productivity. I look forward to this discussion, and thank you so much for being here.
I'm Andrea Bogado from Dell Technologies, and I'm happy to join you in these opening remarks for the conversation on virtual workforce. Our world is going through unprecedented changes that are impacting every aspect of our life. What we have experienced in the past months require us all to pivot in very uncomfortable ways to keep the economy going and our lives progressing. As a technology company, we're experiencing and we are enabling this overnight digital transformation that is happening around the world. And one of the most drastic things that we have seen that is changing is how we work. Government, industries, healthcare, and other places, they had to operate virtually. And in many cases, this was their very, very first time. Working from anywhere is here to stay. And as we move from response to recovery, there are a couple of things that we have learned. One of them is that we need to embrace innovation and we need to let it happen anywhere. We have to prioritize flexibility and open up the spans of talent pool around the world to build a more inclusive and diverse culture. We have also learned to leverage our own values and technology to develop new ways of working while keeping high levels of engagement. As a company that has been actually leveraging work from home for over a decade, we have seen that we continue to see flexible culture combined with the right technology unleashes innovation and life-work balance and integration for our people and also for the future talent. There's no going back. We need to reimagine work in the future. And it's not about working somewhere or at a special time. It's about the outcome. And we need to continue to invest in the society moving forward to enable and make sure that they are prepared for any future challenges.
Good afternoon and welcome. My name is Ariel Pardes and I am a senior writer for Wired Magazine, and I am absolutely thrilled to welcome you to this conversation about the virtual workforce. I want to start by thanking Representative Aguilar and Andrea Bogado for their opening remarks, and of course, thank you to CHCI for hosting this wonderful conference. So this is a conversation about virtual work, which for some of us has very quickly become our new normal. The COVID-19 crisis has become an accelerator for one of the most significant workforce transformations in modern times. And we're seeing both individuals and companies adapting to quickly meet the needs of that new reality. So today I want to talk about how we're adapting, what those changes look like, and how we can rebuild a better future of work given all that's happened this year. And to do that, we have four fantastic panelists who will join me in conversation today. First, please give a warm welcome to Damian Rivera, CEO of the Association of Latino Professionals for America, also known as ALPFA. ALPFA's mission is to empower and develop Latino men and women as leaders of character for the nation in every sector of the global economy. Welcome, Damian. Next, let's welcome. Thank you. Next, joining us is Nelly Borrero, Managing Director and Senior Global and Diversity Lead for Accenture. Nelly is well known for her unwavering passion for inclusion, diversity, and her sharp focus on equality. She works to raise awareness, reshape cultures, and increase understanding at Accenture and to clients across industries. Welcome, Nelly.
Thank you.
We are also pleased to have Kelly McCracken, Vice President of Salesforce's Security Response Center. Kelly has more than 18 years of experience in the cybersecurity and technology industry, specifically focusing on the establishment and standardization of cybersecurity incident response programs. Welcome, Kelly.
Thank you.
And finally, please welcome Zafar Brooks, who is the Director of General Affairs, Government Relations, and Diversity at Hyundai. Zafar leads the company's diversity efforts to support a culture of inclusion and equality and corporate social responsibility programs to create better communities through philanthropic activities. So a wonderful, wonderful set of panelists here. Before we get started with the conversation, I just wanted to let everyone know that we will have a few minutes at the end to answer some questions from the audience. So if you have a question for one of our panelists, you can go ahead and type that into the Q&A box at any time. You can also upvote other people's questions, and we will make sure to save some time to get to those at the very end. But for now, let's dive into it. The virtual workforce has changed so many things about my life, your lives. I think it's very fitting and meta that we're doing this conversation virtually, so anything could happen. But I want to start, Damian, by asking you a question about sort of what has shifted. Obviously, virtual work has brought work into our homes, but it's also brought our homes and our personal lives into work, which is a very weird thing to have happened. And I wanted to ask you about how that's changed the expectations around work. So are individuals now expecting something different from their companies? And are companies now expecting something different from their employees?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. I think one of the things that I've seen, one of the shifts that I've seen is the whole concept of purpose plus work. And a lot of people will say, well, purpose, we've been talking about that for a while, find your why, things like that. I can tell you this, our membership base across the country, 95,000 people, I have never had more conversations with folks from students in college all the way up through corporate board members talking about purpose and how it's coming to play in the forefront of rethinking what you're doing. And so, I know a lot of people probably watching right now say, okay, so how does that relate to this virtual workforce conversation? What's the connection there? And I can tell you, as someone who spent 21 years implementing systems, one of the biggest things you got to think about when an implementing systems perspective is making sure you're taking the business, taking your people into account, so that whatever system you enable, whatever you're enabling from a virtual perspective, from a virtual workforce, allows for that purpose component and the culture of the organization to really come to life in this new virtual workforce that's being created.
I love just starting this conversation off with the concept of purpose. What is work and how does it fit into our lives? That's completely been thrown on its head. Sort of piggybacking off of that idea, I wanted to ask Nellie, given your work on diversity and inclusion, how are you sort of seeing that come into play? What are some of the challenges in keeping people engaged and feeling like the work has a purpose in their life? And what are some of the challenges in sort of balancing a sense of office culture and belonging while people are at home?
Thank you, Ariel, and thank you, Damien. I love the word belonging. Obviously, in the space of inclusion is really, really important. So, Damien mentioned around passion, find your why. And I would say around culture, find your how. So, how are you showing up in this new working environment? I know that prior to this, right, when we still had a lot of person and in-person meetings and connections and networking events, we always tell people network, be heard, be seen, showcase your voice, engage with people, find those mentors, find those sponsors. And in a virtual environment, that game has shifted a little bit, right? So it's around how do you recognize how you're showing up differently? As you think about how you're showing up differently, what is your intention and what are your goals? And then what kind of impact do you want to have? So in virtual environments, are you keeping that camera off or are you on? Are you being seen? Are you engaging in conversations or are you taking a back seat and not engaging in conversations? Are you basically showing up from the perspective that your voice is being heard and that you are contributing and adding value? It's really interesting because a lot of times when we think about culture and how we show up differently, a lot of times when we're in a group setting in person, we're looking for those nonverbal cues, right? So is it my turn to step in? Is it my turn to speak up? Should I go now? Should I go now? And that inner voice is creating all kind of havoc, right? When you're thinking about when to jump in. In a virtual environment, that is very different, right? So you have to have a plan going into every call. So I always recommend when you're engaging in a team meeting that's virtual, whether it is a team meeting where you have a speaking role or not, or you're leading or you're not, find a way for your voice to be heard and for it to be impactful. We need to be seen in order to be part of the bigger picture. And as we think about this, there are things that we have to adjust. So I tell people pause and pivot and make sure that you're adding value in every engagement you are involved in.
I love some of those practical tips, Nellie. Be seen, be heard, put the camera on, put the microphone on, show up, even if you're at home on your computer. I think that's a really wonderful way to think about the individual, the worker, sort of in this context. But Zafar, you also work in diversity efforts, and I wonder if you can sort of speak to how organizations or companies might be tackling that idea of creating a sense of belonging for people. Nellie has this idea that you as the employee can show up by turning on your screen, turning on your camera, being really present. What are sort of organizations doing to foster that sense of belonging and inclusion in this new reality?
Sure. Well, thank you for the question, Ariel, and it's good to see everybody, and it's good to be back with the CHCI again this year for the annual conference. We always look forward to it. Sorry we can't be together in person, but this, I think, is the next best thing. With respect to the question, I agree with what Nellie said, that you do have to show up. You do have to be there, be present. And while we can't be together, we're not necessarily alone, as has been said. So some of the ways that our company, in fact, has chosen to do so is, one, we are having these virtual sessions, whether it be on Zoom or WebEx or Team, Microsoft Team, or all these platforms that we are now learning about, that allows us to not feel isolated. And that's been particularly helpful. The second thing we're doing is we are communicating with the employees often. We're having all employee group emails. We're having all employee conference calls, and we've had all employee Zooms like this where we can get together and hear from our leadership. Our president and CEO, Jose Munoz of North America, has conducted those at least once every sort of 4 or 5 weeks, and we all feel like we are together. And so we are able to work on these projects and do things so that we don't feel completely isolated. It has been a challenge. I think that we're social, right? We're used to seeing each other in the workplace and being able to engage each other at the water cooler. But now we're able to just change the sort of the quality of our work, the way we work. But it actually has worked out very well. And I think our teams are feeling as engaged and as appreciated as before, just in a different way.
Yes, I love that. Different, but no less engaged. Damien, I want to jump back to you since you work with folks in a variety of different industries. And I wanted to ask sort of who this remote work reality is working for and who is getting left behind. Are you seeing differences in terms of how some types of folks are able to adapt to this new reality and how some folks are maybe struggling a little more?
Yeah, so I'll start with this. For the Latino community, us in general, phenomenal from a technology perspective, right? So the getting onto tech and using it and enabling it and leveraging social media to be able to get messages out, phenomenal. The issue comes in, let's start with students. Students that may live in a place where they don't have the high-speed connection. And then all of a sudden, they end up on a Zoom call for an interview. And that Zoom call for the interview goes into something where they have a connection issue or there's some other problem. And so it requires a deeper conversation where the employer understands that that could be an issue, right? And for the student, it also requires that student to potentially have to leave their house, go to a local store, find a connection place, then set up so that nobody's behind them, make sure that they're in a position to be able to come and bring their best self, right? So I encourage companies to understand this is happening for real. From a professional standpoint, what I've seen is the different demographics depending on where you are. So we know, I don't have to throw out that stat around how the Latino community has been impacted by this in a disproportionate way. Multi-generational households. So you have people that are helping their grandparents, that are also helping their kids get set up for the situation. So what I want to make sure I point out is these are things that are causing challenges, but not because of the technology piece. It is a challenge from a standpoint of just being able to have to jump over more hurdles than others, but are still, for lack of a term, bringing it to work, right? So the technology part isn't the issue. And I focus a lot on the positives and what are we doing and really making sure we are making an impact given the difficulties that are happening. But there are some of these other challenges that are out there that are, that could be perceived as a person not bringing their all and wanting to make sure that they, that it's seen by companies that, yep, they are bringing it. It's just that there are these other challenges that are out there.
Yeah, I think that's such an important point, and it makes me wonder how organizations can best prepare themselves for that and be most aware of the sort of various needs of their workforces. Nelly, Zafar, do either of you have thoughts on sort of best practices on being flexible and adaptable in that regard?
Yeah, I'm happy to start. And as Zafar, definitely welcome your thoughts around this as well, since we're in the same space. For me, it's around awareness. We have to make sure that our leaders know, our executives know what are the challenges that exist that they otherwise would not have awareness around. So I find that at this time that we're operating in, we need to make sure that we are identifying some of the challenges that we need to react to. And in some cases, how do we get to a point that we're not reacting, but we're actually in a way of really expecting what's going to be out there as a challenge, and how do we solve for that before it becomes an issue. So as I think about the access that we need to make sure people have to connect with us, even as I think about a simple thing, people within your own organization. Damien mentioned, right, that there's some households that have multi-generational people living together. And I've been on calls where you see grandparents working behind the screen while people are on, kids climbing on laps while you're having calls, right? This is all happening right before COVID. This would have been unheard of. So where are we now? We're in a space where we need to have flexibility. We're in a space where we need to know that people have a lot of anxiety, throughout the day as they're trying to engage in a professional environment, but recognizing that the environment looks different. And we can have, all kind of, I would say, perceptions around how people should show up and what, interruptions they should try to avoid, but some are unavoidable. So how do we pause and ask ourselves, what bias are we showing up with on a daily basis into these exchanges that are negatively impacting people that otherwise cannot control their situation? To Damien's point, some people have to go outside of the home, but going outside of the home to a store today is not that easy, right? We're living in COVID time. We're living at a time that you can't go to Starbucks and find a corner and sit there. So I think we have to think about our bias that's playing out every single day. Where's our flexibility around that? And making sure that we understand that people are showing resilience in ways that we would never before think about how to acknowledge that. So, Safar, I welcome your thoughts as well, but I think it's about
Sure.
awareness, it's about checking our bias, and it's about having flexibility and not judging.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. And I think Damon's comments were well spoken. I think about this from the context of our values. I start back there. What are the core values of the organization? We talk about that quite often as who are we? Who do we profess to be? And in this time, it has caused us to reassess those values and actually test those values to see if we are, in fact, representing what we said we were. We've said for a long time, many organizations, that our people are our strength, that our diversity is what makes us richer. It's what makes us different. But now comes along COVID, where we have to test that to see what does that really mean. And what I'm very proud is our organization, I think, has met that test and is stepping up to it and allowing people to be flexible in their own ways. I love what you said about when the grandparents and the kids come through in the Zooms. Actually, for us now, it's the best part of the meeting. It's the best part of the meeting because we're getting to see the other part of people's lives. We are more than the sort of sum total of our resumes in terms of when we come to the workplace. We bring with us all of those world's experiences and life's experiences that we also enjoy. And so what this process has allowed us to do is to really understand who our people are in different ways, and then begin to engage them in ways that perhaps we hadn't had the occasion to do so before. In our organization, the vast majority of our people still come in 8 to 5. We still sort of come in. We don't have a whole lot of telecommuting that's going on. So there was a trust issue, right? When we first went to work from home experiences and what that might look like and what the productivity might be and what people might contribute. What we're finding is people are far more productive. They're contributing far more, and they're engaged in a way that they hadn't been engaged before. I think the focus issue, as well as their commitment to just the work that we're doing. So it's been a great opportunity to test your values. If we say that our people are our strength, if we say that our differences make us better, this is allowing us to actually live that out in the real world and to make the accommodations as are necessary to achieve those values.
I think those are such great points about how our sense of who we are at work has changed, and how this is a moment to really test our values about what is important for employers and employees alike. I think a lot of people are thinking right now, it's amazing that I get to show my full self at work, but also I'm really eager to get back into the office and not be doing this remote work thing forever. So Kelly, I wanted to ask you, from the perspective of Salesforce or just what you're seeing in the industry more broadly, what's the current thinking about how people eventually return to the office? And is there a rethinking on what that office looks like in the future? Is there a partial virtual component? Do we have different expectations for what people are like when they're in an office environment? What's the sort of thinking on that?
Yeah, it's a great question. The workplace, like you said, has forever changed as a result of this pandemic. And I don't think that it's necessarily a bad thing. I consider this an exciting time, and that reopening will be a journey. Many companies are starting to take a phased approach to opening, much like our local governments are, with having their essential personnel come back first and then additional personnel come in later. And at Salesforce, we are really following 6 guiding principles as we consider reopening our offices globally. The first principle is that we're creating a guideline matrix for reopening, which helps us with the decision-making process to weigh in the many inputs that are coming at us regarding the local COVID statistics and the other additional inputs that we need before we evaluate opening the office. The second principle we're following is prepare with new health and safety measures. So we're reviewing our protocols for our physical workspaces, including the permitted screening and manual contact tracing. And we're also looking at the face coverings and other workplace designs we have to take to make sure everyone stays safe. The third guideline that we're following, I think, is the most important one, is really setting the expectations and over communicating with your employees. So we've been putting together many communications plans for reopening an office for communicating out to our employees, which includes webinars and training, and then guidelines and playbooks. And then when they come into the office, plenty of signage to let them know the protocols they need to follow. The fourth and guideline that we're also following is redesigning that physical space. So when you go back to your office, it's not going to look like it did when you left 6 months ago or more. And it's going to look different because we have to allow for social distancing. So meeting rooms may be larger, or they might not even be existent. And the desks may be spread out. Kitchen and social spaces may be different. The fifth guideline that we're also following is building our strong supply chain. So we need to make sure that we have enough masks and cleaning supplies for all of our offices. And then the sixth and last guideline is we're making sure that we're investing into that deep cleaning to ensure that we're ensuring the best cleaning principles are being followed in each of the offices. So these are some of the guiding principles that we're following to get Salesforce employees back to work. But we also are not just focused on our employees, we're focused on our Ohana as well. So we're working with our customers and our partners and our communities to help get everyone back to work.
Kelly, I'm so struck by how much is changing. It seems like when we finally get back to the office, it's not going to look anything like the office we were in before. There is no returning to the before times. This is something that really has lasting impacts in so many different regards. So I'm going to ask you all a question sort of about that in just a moment, but I want to remind our audience that you can also ask questions of our panelists. If you have anything you want them to share, please just go ahead and type a question and we'll get to those in just a minute. But before we do, I wanted to ask each of our panelists what from this virtual work experiment this year we expect will carry on into the future. And it would be nice, I think, to talk about what we've liked about this moment, right? We've had new flexibility. We've been able to bring our full selves to work. We've been able to work from anywhere. What are some of the things that you expect will come to define work in the future that we've learned and adapted to this year? And Damien, we can start with you and maybe just go down the row.
Sure. I mean, there's a lot that has been. I'll give you one example. There was a group that I had been a part of years ago that they always have these ongoing like happy hour things once every quarter or so. I have literally never been to one. And I finished the day off. It was 6 o'clock. The virtual happy hour was starting, and I was like, you know what? Let me jump in and just see how they're doing. To be able to see that group, my entire family put a Zoom on for everybody to get together, and we were all talking about how, and this is a separate incident, right, of why haven't we ever done this before? We live kind of all over the country. There's no reason why we shouldn't have done this before. The technology has been there for a while. So one of the biggest things I think is the expansion of networks that I believe is going to translate to more innovation across the country, right? Because now you're not just going to be siloed into your group at work or your smaller group in whatever area. You're going to have access and engaging with people all over the country in a more deliberate way, a more intentional way that I think is going to translate to quite a bit of innovation over the next 5-10 years.
Yes. Nellie, what for you stands out?
So, Damien, I love all of that because I agree, right? We've discovered this possibility of connecting with so many people and be more intentional about that. As I've gone through this journey since mid-March and where we are today, prior to that, I was constantly on an airplane, hotel room, traveling nonstop. And as much as I have loved my career, as much as I've loved this journey, have seen the world, and in places I never thought I would have seen before, there comes with that also, the guilt factor, right? I'm not home, I'm not present, I'm traveling, I won't get here for this event, that event. So this time out for me has been incredible. Yes, I miss a lot of things that we used to do, like go to restaurants and hang out with family and friends, but I have loved the fact that we have been on this time out together, meaning my family, that even while my son was doing social distancing in the evening, we would get together, not running off to an airport. We can have deeper, longer conversations. So when I think about that guilt gene that I think was injected in me at birth, right, I feel less guilty about a lot of things right now. But I do think there's another side to this, right, that is hard to sort of decide when to cut off work, right? Because you're on calls till late at night. Calls are bleeding into Saturdays and Sundays because nobody's traveling. So we used to get together on Sunday night in person to get ready for the week. Now that's not happening. So you kind of dial each other up and say, hey, ready for the week. So there's still some of this drawing the line that we need to do. But I got to tell you, for me, it has been an opportunity to sort of hit the pause button in a major way. And to your point in your question around, what's going to change permanently, I do believe that people are going to start asking themselves this question more and more, and that is, do I really have to be there in person? Right? As things open up and as, meeting requests start coming up again and show up to this country, that country, this state, we're going to start asking ourselves, do I really need to be there? Because we've gotten used to sort of this exchange as well, right? So my final thing around this is I have also learned in this process that we need to understand, like I said earlier, when are we showing up? How are we showing up? So when I'm, during working hours, I am going to act as if I got up that morning and I was going to get in my car or on a plane or on a train or whatever the case, and I'm going to show up to work, right? I'm going to show up as if I was walking into an office. And then when I'm done with the day, I'm going to get into my leggings and whatever else I want to do to go play tennis or go for a walk. I find for me that works because I have to psychologically and physically show up for what I'm about to engage in. So that's what I would say my experience has been.
I love that. Kelly, what do you think?
Yeah, much like Zafar had mentioned earlier, I think one of the things that we should definitely continue doing is, I know a lot of companies have taken on doing the all hands calls company wide and doing over communicating with their employees. I know at Salesforce, we have 3 different types of series that we're doing each week. We have an all hands call with our executives to the entire company, which has been great. Like, we had those before COVID, but it wasn't on a weekly basis. It was more quarterly or biannually. And this, being able to see our executives every week, is giving us a lot more unity as a company. Additionally, we're doing what we call Be Well sessions, which we've also opened up to the larger community, which is bringing in stars and specialists and experts on different things, from wellness to cooking to mental health and meditation. And it's just been a great way to kind of like not just focus on getting the task done at work, but looking at your overall well-being of your employees. And then the third area or series that we've been doing is Leading for Change, which is really looking at how are different businesses getting back to work and what are some of the challenges they're having. So I think for me, those sessions that we've been doing on a weekly basis, yes, it's just one more thing on our calendars, but they are actually very valuable to us. And I hope that companies continue to do some of this communication and outreach to their employees that they have done. But like, I have to say that running an operations team virtually and if all being remote, I've actually seen my team become more productive, and the morale has gone up because they do have a little bit more flexibility and they're not dealing with the long commutes and everything. So I do think that we're going to see a lot more companies rethinking whether people really have to come back into the office. And it may be more of a work from anywhere type of environment.
Yeah, Zafar, that sounds similar to what you were saying earlier.
Yeah. So I think Nellie and I have the same job. So I think I did 160,000 air miles last year, and so my office was an airplane. So I think when you were sharing that, I thought, yeah, that's exactly right. But the things I just jotted down as we were talking about, what has changed here is strategic innovation. It's caused us to rethink everything, rethink why we do stuff and how we do stuff and what needs to be done. And I think that's going to stick with us for a long time. I think we always fancied ourselves as always sort of challenging the status quo and not being sort of wed to the past and being able to do things differently. But this has challenged us in a way that I don't think we could have envisioned before. I'll give you for instance. I'm going to be hosting an event this coming Saturday, actually, which for years we've done in Washington, D.C. as an in-person gala dinner. Now, how do you hold an in-person gala dinner remotely with people all across the country? Well, we host the event, we just don't have dinner. And we can still share the things that we intended to share, and we're bringing each other together in a way that's both efficient to the organization, it's certainly cost efficient, time efficient, and it caused us to be more creative about how we did it. So I think that's a long-term benefit to the enterprise. The second thing I think is clear focus. We are now starting to think about our priorities in a much more strategic way, a much more focused way about what we're doing. I think and why we're doing it. Because there are some things we did because that's kind of like the way we always did it, right? We just kind of did do it that way. So I think it's allowed us to revisit our strategic priorities. It's allowed us to think more innovatively. I think a lot of things are going to change. Now, I live in the Los Angeles area, and so driving in cars for us is just a way of life. So the benefit of not being in the car for a couple hours a day is something that we certainly hope will be a permanent thing that we'll live with. But I'd say the three things that I say we hopefully will survive COVID and will be the better things that came out of COVID is one, again, asking us to be more efficient with our resources and how we do the things we do. I could not have imagined a year ago we could have achieved so many of the things we set forth against our own business goals and have done them all virtually. That was one. Second, it has created a trust in the organization. It has created a trust in each other because we can't be there together. I don't know exactly what you're working on. I don't know when your piece will be done, but we have to meet up so that piece can come together, and we are all doing it on our own paces, on our own times, but we meet that goal. The third is I think it's improved our listening skills. We're hearing each other now. We're hearing each other. The background noise of the airplane or the get in the Uber or the hotel, all that's out of the place, and we can now just focus on each other. And the last piece is the work-life balance. I know that's a piece we talk about quite often, but we're actually getting to know our own families better. I've got a 4-year-old grandson that I've now had 6 months to watch him grow and to listen to him and to focus on him as I'm doing my Zoom calls. But I'm able to be here every night and not on an airplane. And so I think that will change quite a bit of who we are through work-life balance because we've now gotten to see our families in a way that maybe we hadn't seen them. We saw them, but we didn't see them. And now we're seeing our families in a way that's much different. That has probably been the piece I'll never forget is that watching him go from 3.5 to 4 and the change in those 6 months of his talking and his walking and all the stuff he does will change forever how I approach family, I think.
That is so amazing to hear. I think what I'm hearing from all of you collectively is that this can really be a moment to question everything from why do we show up at work? How do we show up at work? Do we need to be there in person? Is there a better way that we could do this? Is there a better way we can communicate with our employees? Is there a way we can try to do something differently? And I love that spirit of adaptation and innovation and using this as a moment to be sort of provocative about sort of the status quo. I want to jump into some questions from our audience now. And the first one, many of you have touched on already, but Kelly, maybe you can start with this question. The question is, what are some of the best practices to keep a remote workforce engaged? And Kelly, I thought you could take this since you mentioned some of the things that Salesforce is doing around this right now.
Yeah, I think mainly it's reaching out and just having regular communications. I know just even with my team, I have a global team. I'm doing what I call a Touchbased Tuesday. So every week I started
Mm.
sending an email to my team. Just it starts out very casual, informal, letting them know how I am doing personally, what my family is doing, what my kids are doing. But it's providing them that touch outside of the workplace. But then also letting them know, top of mind, what am I working on, or calling out some kudos to team members. But that I didn't start until the pandemic, until we went remote, and I'm like, I'm not able to connect with my teams like I used to, and so I think just really finding ways to connect, like many of us had mentioned, and even with our family, doing those Zoom calls, we could have always done them, but no one thought about doing them until we were in the middle of a pandemic. And so, establishing those programs and keep them going as we get through COVID.
Mm. Nellie, I'm going to ask you to answer this next one. How are you handling employees' needs for childcare and the fact that many schools are opening virtually?
That's a tough one, right? Because we're in uncharted waters. I mean, I know Accenture has put out support for several hours a week to help people with their childcare. But again, it's very difficult because in some cases, families are not comfortable letting people into their home. They have created a bubble. In order to break that bubble, there's a lot of discussions that need to go on. I think what we're doing here is we're making sure that we understand that there are these challenges and that people are going to need flexibility, that we're going to be able to have that agile, flexible mindset to say, the days of scheduling a call at 8 o'clock in the morning may not be helpful to people that are trying to get their kids ready for breakfast and doing the distance learning at home. So we have to sort of think about how do we respond to the needs of people. And going back to what I said earlier, from that perspective, is how to keep our bias away from that, especially when it's a negative bias. So it is about flexibility. It is about a greater level of understanding. And, Safar mentioned this earlier. I think he said this twice. And twice when he said it, I felt like he is so right. And that is, we have developed trust with our people. Trust to know that if they cannot be present from 8 to 10, then I know that they'll be present at another point in the day, right? To be flexible, to make up for that time that they've missed. So it's about being agile, it's about being flexible. And yes, every organization is going to set up all kind of ways they can support their people, but it's very personal, right? I know when my kids were very young, I didn't want a stranger that I didn't know, coming into my home and taking care of my child, right? I mean, even if they were going to be in the next room. So, and I could speak for my culture, my Latinaness. There's a lot of expectations there too within our culture, right? When it comes to our kids, we have to make sure that it's family that's taking care of them. And, everybody has to go through this whole vetting process. I mean, so there's a lot. So I would say from an Accenture perspective, we're providing from a support system as it relates to hours that we're giving people for help, depending if they want to take that assistance or not, or encouraging our leaders to have the flexibility to understand that we need to have an agile workforce, and that means flexibility.
Yes, so critical, and communication as well. Zafar, I'm going to ask you a hard question from our audience. What, from a policy perspective, needs to be accomplished to ensure a productive, cyber-secure, private, and safe teleworking environment? And Kelly, maybe you can weigh in on that after, since you have such a background in cybersecurity. But yeah, what policy-wise can we be doing to make sure that virtual work works well?
Yeah, so that one's probably over my pay grade. I'm not as versed on cybersecurity issues or issues involving technology to be safe. I would just add sort of generally, and I welcome Kelly's technical piece. Generally, is to you know use the technology smart, be smart, and understand that these technologies are a tool. It's a resource for us to do what we do. It's not an excuse, or certainly not an alternative to us continuing to use good business practices. Because I know that, I've heard all of these things where these things can be hacked or misused. I'm not sophisticated enough to tell you how and what we can do to change that. But I do think we should be smart as colleagues, as coworkers, in what we say and what we do using technology, because there are those out there who could misuse it against our intent. And maybe Kelly can weigh in on the policy piece to how you address that through a policy point of view.
Yeah, so I'm not on the policy side, but I mean there are things that companies needed to quickly put in place before or when we all started moving home back in February, March timeframe, and moving people to a remote virtual workforce and trying to secure everything required them to get VPNs in place. And most companies have those, but to be able to handle their entire workforce on a VPN at one time, a lot of them had to scale up. But really, there is a lot of security awareness training. Every company should have a security awareness training program. And I know at Salesforce, we review ours annually before we send it out to all employees. And we were incorporating a lot of things regarding heightened awareness and vigilance around phishing emails and things around operational security when you're at home and you have either roommates or extended family and everything, and you're trying to keep certain information confidential for your company, or conversations confidential, and you have ears and eyes everywhere. You need to have some operational security around that and consider your surroundings. So I think companies are coming up on different ways that they can implement policies, but really it comes down to security awareness and training and some technical controls that companies have to put in place.
Yeah, it's going to be a concern for a long time, I expect. Damien, I love this question. How can we invest in our young professionals to ensure that they are prepared for the future of work?
Yeah, one big thing, be there, right? And what I mean by be there is get involved with something. Perfect example of that is actually, so Nellie, I reached out to Nellie when a lot of our students lost internships when the pandemic started. And I had a conversation with her about, hey, look, here's the situation. We have a ton of students who lost interns. So they lost knowledge opportunity and they lost financial opportunity. Can you help us think about something? Accenture already had they had their interns going, and they worked with us to establish a fellowship program that they were the first company to jump into. Then we got a bunch of other companies to jump into, and we were able to really help save the summer for quite a few students. So my point is just be there. If you're not sure how to get involved, reach out to alpha.org. We can help you figure out how you plug in to students to help them. Just be there, show up, let them know you care, and share your stories and help them understand how their stories and their journey and where they are actually is translating to benefits and why they are positioned well going forward. Not about the negatives, but about what they can do to grow going forward. So in 2 words, be there.
May I add on that, Ariel?
Sure.
May I add on that, Ariel? So I love everything he said, and I wanted to sort of pivot this to the employees, the current employees, particularly some of our young employees who are newer in their experience. One of the things we have is employee resource groups. And our employee resource groups are a way that employees of different affinities and cultures can connect. And so we've been having these sort of, each group has its own Zooms, if you like, on a schedule that is right for itself. But what we found is that by employees connecting with each other through the ERGs and being able to talk about issues they have in common throughout this pandemic, throughout this work from home experience, it has kept them also connected to the enterprise. So, for example, as you know, we're starting Hispanic Heritage Month, and Monday we will have a big event with our Amigos Unidos ERG to celebrate Hispanic Heritage Month. So while we're separated, we're still trying to keep as many of those sort of familial things that we can recall. And we've got a great guest speaker that's going to be joining us, and we'll be able to share our experiences and the like. So the ERG process, I believe, is one that if organizations have, letting that process continue. I meet with each chair once a quarter. We talk about, what some of the business goals are, what some of the things that are going on. They then meet with their individual committees. I join a lot of the committees, and that connection continues to bind us and share with us what we are experiencing. And the younger people in particular get to have that camaraderie and that interaction through the employee resource group process.
I love that. Well, we're almost out of time here, but before we wrap, I wanted to just ask all of our panelists to share a brief closing thought about how we can ensure success in this new virtual reality, both for individuals and companies and organizations as a whole. What is sort of your key to success, if you will? And maybe Zafar, we'll start with you and we'll work our way backwards.
Sure. Well, first of all, thank you again for having us. We're always glad to be with the CHCI and this amazing work we're doing to keep us together. I would suppose what I would leave us with as a pearl, if you will, a nugget that has been helpful for us is continue to check in with each other. I don't think we can say it enough. We might be separated, but we're not alone. Each of us comes to the table with something different. We each bring a certain different experiences, and we've talked about on this panel today that the beauty of what we've experienced is getting to see each other's lives outside the four corners of our offices. But do continue to check in. Do continue to check in with your colleagues, check in on the milestones of life that they're experiencing, and sometimes just check in on the things that are not work related. I think that will allow us to be reminded that we really aren't alone. Even though we have to be separated, we're just not going by ourselves. That's what I would say would be the pearl I would offer.
I love that. Kelly, what would your key to success be?
Yeah, I would just say that encouraging autonomous working so that people can continue to have flexibility. I think that has really made the difference as people are juggling families. People still have to juggle families even when we're not in a pandemic. So I think trying to encourage an autonomous workforce where you can work outside the 8 to 5. You don't have to necessarily be at your desk 8 to 5. You can work, do what you need to do, and work at the hours that works for you. I think that would be a great thing.
You and me both. Nellie, what about you?
Thank you. So I love what I've heard so far. What I would say is pause, right? Pause and conduct a self-assessment and then have self-awareness. How are you feeling on any given day, week, month, whatever the case is? I think, what this has taught us is that prior to this mandatory sort of shutdown, lockdown, whatever we want to call it from a virtual perspective, is that we were running and just, going. And this has forced us to sort of take a time out. And in this time out, how have you taken advantage of that? Yes, there have been difficult times and we need to have relational needs that are not being met by seeing each other in person. We have mental needs, we have physical needs when it comes to, the connection point. What I would say is take the time, pause, self-reflect, be self-aware, and understand how you want to show up in the world now more than ever. What does that look like for you from a personal brand? What's that like for you for the brand that you represent? I represent Accenture, but I represent myself, right? How do I want to show up for Accenture? How do I want to show up for me on any given day? Because I'll spend, and Damien, you're going to be mad at me because I'm probably taking your line, but you got to focus on your purpose, right? It's so incredibly important now more than ever. So as Damien said, the why, and I will add the how, and then Damien, I'm going to turn it over to you with that one.
So I'm going to pick up from when you left off. After you take your pause and you are thinking through it, KNA, knowledge, network, action. Think about how you continue to grow your knowledge because things are changing so fast right now. You want to continue to expand that. Make sure you're taking advantage of what's happening right now in connecting with more people than you ever had before through that network. And then finally, take an action. Take some type of action to make sure you are moving forward because that's what's going to translate over to you making an impact in this world. So take a pause. Expand your knowledge, expand your network, take some action, make an impact.
Oh, I absolutely love that. And the thing that I'll just add to just sort of try to tie up everything that has been said today in a neat little bow is that this is a moment that feels very stressful, but it's also a moment that has a tremendous opportunity to rebuild our work lives in the fashion that suits us best. And so instead of looking at this as a year that's really broken a lot of things about the workplace, we can look at it as an opportunity to reconstruct something that could be made even better. And so for individuals and companies alike, there's a great sense of hope and optimism about what work could look like in the future. Thank you all so much for joining. This has been very rich and surprisingly very optimistic, which I love. So thank you so much for sharing your wisdom and your insights. And of course, thank you to CHCI for this amazing opportunity. And that's it.